One of the lessons I've come to learn over my 27 years of living is that the present moment is not ad infinitum. The present moment is just an ephemeral state that we find ourselves in. It's short lasting in the grand scheme of the totality of our lives. There's two moments in particular in my life that really stand out and exemplify this idea. And those two times are when I was a high school dropout and the aftermath of my 6 month long bipolar manic episode. I'm going to talk about each of these events and I'm going to discuss how each of these events impacted my perspective at the time and how my perspective shifted and changed as time went on. The message that I want to get across in this is that a bad past does not mean a bad future. So if you find yourself in a position now where you're severely struggling, you're at rock bottom, you feel like there's no light at the end of that tunnel, then this video is definitely for you. If you've been there, then you'll definitely be able to relate to what I talk about in this video. And stick around because I'm going to share how I got out of that period, how I got out of those stages of my life where it felt like my life was over, and how I've reached the point where I am today. The point where I am today is solid. I can't complain. I'm returning to college for the first time in 4 years. I'm going to be studying communication and pre law, and hopefully, after that, go to law school to obtain a doctor of jurisprudence and then take the bar exam and become an attorney. I got my path laid out before me, and I'm confident that I can be successful on this journey so long as I remain diligent and committed, which is my intention. So, starting off with the first event, let's set some context here. My sophomore year of high school was phenomenal. I was a straight A student. I had taken honors classes, all honors classes, for the first time. I hadn't been in honors classes prior to that. And I got straight A's, straight hundreds in pretty much every class that I took. And towards the end of the year, I ran for class president and I won. I won a school poetry contest and it ended up advancing to the state semifinals, even though this was the first type of public speaking competition I had ever been a part of. Altogether, it was an extremely successful school year. I had a perfect attendance as well. Or I might have missed one day. I think there was one day where I was super sick and didn't go, but I pretty much had a perfect attendance, just about. Things changed in the summer, though. In the summer, I discovered an intelligence test which said that I was not as intelligent as I had believed myself to be. All of the people around me had been building me up and saying that I'm such this incredibly intelligent person and that I got my whole world ahead of me, and I really ate all that up and had this high expectation of myself based off what they said about my intelligence. So discovering this IQ test and reading that I was a person of superior low ability and that I'm in the extremely low percentile for this category or that category, it really took its toll on my psyche. It severely affected me in a negative, detrimental way. It was so detrimental to my mental well being. I became fixated and obsessed on this idea of increasing intelligence as a result of discovering this IQ test. And so over the course of that summer, I took a number of actions, some of which were profoundly drastic. Among them being, I stopped medications I was on cold turkey. I took Zoloft for anxiety and depression. And I stopped that medication cold turkey because I read online that it decreases intelligence, which was not a very intelligent decision. So maybe the test wasn't so far off, but no, that was a joke. But so I discovered this test and I became fixated on increasing my intelligence, and it was an unhealthy obsession. So I ended up ultimately dropping out of school as a result of this. That's how severe of a blow this was to my self esteem. It didn't matter that I had these past achievements, both inside and outside of the classroom. The only thing that mattered was this negative discovery. It profoundly impacted the way I perceived the world in a negative way. And so then I had a high school dropout period that lasted 2 years. During those 2 years, I was more depressed than I ever had been up until that point in my life. This would change and I would have a more depressive experience later, but it was the most depressed I had been at that point in time. It felt like my life was over. I felt like I had been labeled an unfit, that I was incapable of achieving the dreams that I aspire to, that I was incapable of applying enough effort to reach the destination that I wanted to be at. And so that negative thought process, those negative thought spirals, really sent me on a path downward. At the beginning of my dropout period, I actually remember I wrote a journal entry. And the first three words of that journal entry are fear, doubt, uncertainty. Because those are the words that encapsulated my thought process at that time. I was afraid about what my future held. I had doubt that I even had a future, and I had so much uncertainty about where I had to go from there. Thankfully, I was able to pull myself out of this negative line of thinking, and I was able to eventually recover enough to where I returned to high school and became the first person in my immediate family to graduate high school. But it took so much to get there. It took a 2 year depressive episode. And that's something I've learned, is that in my case, time seems to be a healer in some sense. I don't find the solutions to remedy my problems immediately. They come gradually with time. I slowly build myself up to this position where I'm capable of getting back on my feet and getting back out there. I can't stress this enough. I was so profoundly depressed at this time. It felt like my life was over. I was suicidal at times. And it was so bad that when I actually returned to high school for my junior year, I did have a suicide attempt very early into that school year. And as a result, I went to a partial hospital program, got put on medication again, and then went back on a positive trajectory from there for the most part. There's some caveats, there were some roadblocks, but generally I was going in a positive direction after being put back on medication. And so, my junior and senior year were successful. I graduated high school, and I attribute that to the fact that I was put back on medications. I was put back on Zoloft, and I took it consistently. I was diligent in taking my medication, and I feel like in some sense it was the right medication at the time. Things would change. So that's the first event, is that I was a high school dropout for 2 years. And I said this before and I'm going to say it again, is this idea of gradual change. And what I mean by that is that small steps add up to become big steps. When I was depressed and a high school dropout, I isolated to my bedroom. And that first step for me was probably making that journal entry and putting my thought process down. A second step was months later when I went outside for the first time in ages. A third step was when I got a job working as a cashier, interacting with the public, and I worked that job for 10 months, saving and putting aside money that I could then use to fuel my return to school. Because of course I was going to need resources in order to continue. And so that's what I did. I took gradual steps, and it created momentum. And eventually I was in a position where I could go back to school and graduate and become the first in my family to do so. The second event, the more recent event, was my 6-month long bipolar manic episode, more specifically the depression that followed it. Now, I have over 80 plus videos on my channel, in many of which I talk about my 6 month manic episode and the delusions and myriad of hallucinations that I experienced during that episode. If you're interested, that playlist is on my channel. It's called Bipolar Breakdown. In this, I want to focus on the depression that followed the manic episode. Because after having this episode, after losing control of my mind like that, I eventually regained my intellectual faculties, and I had the discernment and insight to recognize that this person was not myself. This was not me who went through those trials. This was a different person. It's like a part of me died as a result of that manic episode. In the aftermath, I had to deal with so many consequences. I had to deal with a Pandora's box of new problems. I was no longer in school. I no longer worked. I lost my social relationships. I was isolating. I was filled with negative self-talk constantly, thinking about things I said and did during mania that were embarrassing, things that I was ashamed of and that I regretted, things that made me feel like I wasn't a good person. Gradually, over time, I started to recognize certain things. One of those things I recognize is that the people who witnessed my manic episode, it is extremely unlikely that they are thinking about the things I said and did as much as I think they are thinking about it. And I apologize if that's a little bit of a word salad right there, but let me just slow it down and say that one more time. It's very unlikely that other people think about you as much as you think they're thinking about you. So in my case, I had this overwhelming fear and regret that everybody knows about my manic episode because I disseminated it all over social media, and I was living in a fraternity house at the time, and people became accustomed to my craziness. They witnessed it, some firsthand, some on social media. But bottom line is that so many people encountered my manic episode at one point or another. People from my past, my high school, people who I lived with in the fraternity house, family members. And so, all these people witnessed it, and it made me feel like I'll never overcome the embarrassment and shame of this. But eventually I recognized, I learned that lesson that people are so preoccupied and busy with their own lives, it's really unlikely that they're thinking about you as much as you think they are. They're probably not thinking about you at all. If so, it's like in a very brief, ephemeral moment that it's not very long lasting. That was a huge step for me. I felt confident enough to go outdoors again, even though it was on a severely limited basis. I started getting up early in the morning. I'm talking like 4:30 in the morning to go to a local honeydew where I am to get a nice coffee, and then I would go home, and that would be my social interaction for the day. And I was proud of achieving that because it got me out of the house. It got me outdoors. It got me interacting with somebody. Even though it was on an extremely limited basis, I was still doing things that I hadn't done in years. This depressive episode was so long. During it, I put on so much weight. I went from 180 to 354. As such, you can see my present physical state. I'm not exactly in my prime physique for now. I'll get there. And it's a consequence of that depression that I felt and the trial and error of going through so many different medications and trying to find out which ones were most effective for me, which ones were the best fit. So I had that gradual change of thought, change of action, going to the coffee shop, thinking about how other people are likely acting and that they're not thinking about me as much as I think they are. I started to develop a more positive attitude, so much so that I ended up signing up for a gym membership. And at one point I got as low as 310, lost 44 pounds, and I put some of that back on. I'm back up at 320 again, working on getting it off. But the point is that I'm capable of getting it off. The point is I took gradual steps that helped me build up momentum and get me to the positive place now to where I'm actually returning to college. This is huge for me. I was expelled by my last college because of actions I had taken during my manic episode. I felt like my life was over. No college will ever accept me. I just got kicked out of UMass Amherst. This was a fantastic school, very eminent public institution. It was ranked like 24 in the nation out of public universities when I went there. And I got kicked out of there. I was so ashamed. I beat up myself. I was so hard on myself over that fact. And I tried relentlessly to try and get myself back in. I wrote letters to the dean. I contacted the ombuds office and maintained correspondence with them for quite a prolonged period of time. And I even ended up writing and drafting up a Reddit post, which I've since deleted. But I wrote a Reddit post talking about how I got expelled, and I wrote it and posted it on the UMass community page. And it got such positive feedback, and people saw where I was coming from as someone who experienced a major mental health episode. And I think that really speaks to how understanding of a community that UMass was and still is, and also about how far society has come. So I feel like if I experienced this manic episode maybe even 20, 30 years ago, it would have had a totally different reaction. I don't think people would have been as understanding and accepting of what I have to say, what I've been through. Everything that transpired was quite the ordeal, and this ordeal had such drastic consequences which took me incredible amounts of time to recover from. But the bottom line is that I took gradual steps and recovered from them. So what I want you to take away from this video, my main message, is that a bad past doesn't mean a bad future. When I was a dropout, I thought my life was over. After my manic episode, I thought my life was over. And yet, in both of those cases, in both of those circumstances, my thought process turned out to be wrong. Time proved them wrong. The gradual actions I took to foment positive change proved them wrong. And I'm in a position where I'm now returning to school, and I'm forward thinking, and I have a clear-cut path laid out before me for me to follow and achieve success and aspire to my highest dreams. You can do the same. If you're out there struggling, please know that you're not alone. Please know that you're worth it. You're worth it to this world. You're worth it to me. You're worth it to yourself. Think about recovery and do it for yourself more than anyone. And do it on your own time. There's no real rush here. We are only here once, but we got to make the most of our time without sacrificing our mental well-being. And I'm proof that you can do that. I'm proof that there is hope. So never surrender hope. There's hope for a better future. And if anyone ever has anything that they want to talk about or personal stories, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I do have my email listed on my YouTube channel if you ever want to reach out to me there, if you feel more confidentiality would be needed. I'm not a professional by any means, but if you want to share lived experiences and talk about them, I'm always willing to do that. Or if you just want to share in the comments below or not share at all, that's totally up to you. I just want to let you know that if you need an ear to vent to, my ear is here. My ears are here. There you go. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Remember, a bad past doesn't mean a bad future. My name is Tyler Adolfo. Please hit that subscribe button if you're new. Everyone, please like and comment so that more people can see this video. And with that being said, love, light, and tranquility to all.